Hello and welcome everyone to this J Street Policy Center briefing, an alternate path for Israeli policy. My name is Avram Spergen. I'm the Policy and Research Coordinator of the J Street Policy Center. And we're here today talking to Drs. Assaf David and Smadar Ben-Natan. In February, the Forum for Regional Thinking and Leer Jerusalem Institute published a new report titled The Present Day, Peacemaking Alternatives for Israeli Policy. My colleague is going to share a link to the report in the chat. This discussion couldn't come at a more urgent time, a moment which shows us that the cause of peace and the fight for our democracy are inextricably intertwined as endless war becomes a pretext for further democratic erosion. Endorsed by more than 130 Jewish and Arab Israeli scholars, the present-day report is written from a peace-seeking Israeli perspective intended for all those who strive for a peaceful future. Following open remarks by our two speakers and then a round of questions for me, the speakers will take questions from the audience, so please put your questions in the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Also, a recording of this discussion will be available later today on our YouTube channel for you to rewatch and share, and our comms team will turn this into a podcast as well. Without further ado, Assaf is the Director of the Israel and the Middle East Department at the Leer Jerusalem Institute. He's also the co-founder and academic director of the Forum for Regional Thinking. Assaf teaches comparative politics of the Middle East at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Our other guest, Smadar, is an assistant professor in the Department of Global Studies at the University of Oregon, specializing in human rights and international law. Previously, she was a human rights and criminal defense lawyer in Israel-Palestine. She's also a fellow at the Forum for Regional Thinking, as well as a board member of B'Tselem and Academia for Equality. We're thrilled to have you both here. And with that, I'll hand it over to Dr. David for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Abraham, and thank you very much for having us, and thank you all the listeners that joined us. I'll just say a few words about the what I think is the importance of this report following the publication of the investigations of military security establishment on October 7th. So, the report is basically a mix of an analysis of the road to October 7th and the road from October 7th to a better future for Israel-Palestine. And initially, I thought that why do we need an analysis of October 7th or the road to October 7th? I mean, it's very obvious what happened. It's very obvious the road to the massacre, to the Hamas invasion. And then we saw that that report on the day after in Israel, mostly coming from center-left Zionist political wing, seemed to overlook the dynamics of Israel-Palestine from 1948 onwards, and especially under the government of the right wing, and especially the Netanyahu government, which I prefer to call Netanyahu regime. So, and then after the publication of the reports, of the investigation reports of October 7th by military security establishment, by research division of the military, by the Shin Bet, and so on and so forth, I noticed a very troubling shift in the discourse, in the professional discourse on Israel-Palestine, whereas the notion, I think, that's promoted there is basically that we didn't understand Hamas, we didn't understand the culture of Islam, we didn't understand the culture of radical Islam. We should understand Quran, we should understand Hadith, and so on and so forth. And coming, in the past from research or military intelligence, it was very alarming for me. Because I think that the work that should be done, whereas in military security establishment, but especially in academia, in NGOs in Israel, should be focused on facts on the ground, and not about cultural othering of Muslims, not about fantasies about what Hamas is, about the fact or about the argument that Hamas equals ISIS and so on and so forth. It's not true. It's not true. And if we go that way, we're bound to fail again. And we're bound to misunderstand the dynamics between Israel and Palestine, and the fact that Israel, and especially, as I said, the right-wing government of Israel, push the Palestinians towards more and more violence, and more critical and more severe violence, and ending with the terrible, horrific events of October 7th. So what we're doing basically in the report is taking the discussion back to facts, to dynamics, to the fact that Hamas can be dealt with, to the fact that the Palestinian national movement can be dealt with politically and diplomatically. And that's basically what should be done, at least on the part of Israeli governments. Thank you.
Thank you for that excellent overview. Dr. Ben-Natan, over to you.
Thank you. So first of all, I really want to thank all of you for hosting us, and to thank Assaf for initiating this document that I'm very proud to be part of, with a great group of other scholars that worked on it. And initially, we worked on a document that the audience for which was the Israeli audience, because we felt that the Israeli audience is not presented with a political alternative, either from the government or from the opposition. And they needed to see that there is another alternative. Now, translating this document into English, we really hope to bring it to you, and for it to be a tool for you in your advocacy. And so in what I'm going to talk about today very briefly is 4 talking points that I think you could take from this document, and that I know because I've been living in the United States for over 8 years now. So I've been speaking to many Jewish communities and others, and these are talking points that are very prevalent in discussions about Israel-Palestine in the United States. So the first talking point or argument that we hear is that Israel has no choice but to defend itself and wage war. It's in a bad neighborhood. It doesn't have any choice if it wants to exist. And I think this document presents the many choices that Israel had over the years to choose a policy that would not bring it to the present day. Israel is the powerful actor in this conflict. It chose, after the Oslo Accords, not to establish the right conditions for a permanent solution and a Palestinian state. It chose, after the Oslo Accords, not to improve the lives of Palestinians in a way that would persuade them that peace is the best choice. After the disengagement, it chose to strengthen Hamas at the expense of the Palestinian Authority, with the sole goal of preventing a Palestinian state from being realized. It chose to promote peace treaties with other Arab nations in the Abraham Accords and in the ongoing negotiations with Saudi Arabia, at the expense of Palestinians and not with them, not by including them. And this has actually was a main trigger, especially the Saudi Arabia negotiation, that brought us and that triggered October 7th. So this is the first answer. And the second very short answer is, what about the Palestinians' right to defend themselves? How many Israelis were killed? How many Palestinians were killed? Well, we are well over 50,000 Palestinians. What, do they have a right to defend themselves? Does anyone support that right? Only independent statehood, and this is what we say is the first step, only independent statehood could provide Palestinians with the right to defend themselves, not in order to wage war, but to make peace. The second talking point is that there is no partner for peace. Israel does not have Israel wants peace, but it has no partner because Palestinians are either too radical or too divided. Well, there is some truth to that point. I mean, if you have, but only a very limited truth. If you have honest, frank discussions with Palestinians, they will tell you that their leadership is in a very bad condition, that it is divided, and that it needs to, step up their game. They need to get things together. It is true, and you have to be honest about that. But it is not the entire truth. And the truth lies also in the broader context. The Arab Peace Initiative has been on the table since 2002. All the major Arab nations have agreed to establish and to normalize relations with Israel under the condition that Israel would enable a Palestinian state. If you listen to speeches by representatives of the Arab League, of Syria, of King Abdallah in Lebanon, speeches in English in the UN, they all say we are not here to eliminate Israel. We are prepared to have regional peace with Israel. And in that framework, we can enable peace also with the Palestinian leadership. Hamas was, in fact, also on the way to become more moderate and to transition, but it transitioned back to a more radical position because of the way that Palestinians have been sidelined in the global or regional politics. The third talking point is that Israel can de-radicalize Gaza. Israel will achieve an ultimate victory, and after that, it will de-radicalize the Palestinians, it will re-educate them, and thereby create conditions for peaceful existence. Regardless of the fact that this is kind of a colonial fantasy and delusional hubris that we can re-educate Palestinians, while incitement and dehumanization is also taking place very strongly in Israeli society, in Israeli schools, in Israeli media. So we say both societies need to work towards reconciliation. But also even Steve Witkoff, Trump's representative to the negotiation, said recently in a podcast that actually Assaf shared with us in the forum. Even he recognizes that Hamas cannot be completely eliminated and defeated. It's not only a terrorist organization. It is a popular movement. It is an idea that builds very much on the failures of the Palestinian Authority and of Israel and on the support of Israel. And although its military capabilities certainly need to be countered and disabled completely, the idea and the popular sentiment behind it cannot be completely de-radicalized. We need to change the context in order to change the consciousness of the people. And the last point is that Israel keeps Jews safe. And you hear this a lot in the United States. Many US American Jews support Israel because their main argument, we need Israel to keep Jews safe. Look at Israel right now and in the last 2 years, and look at Israel during the Second Intifada. Israel is in fact the least safe place in the world for Jews. Jews are being killed for being Jews in the largest numbers when they're in Israel. And I'm not only talking about victims of terrorism and of October 7th, I'm also talking about Israeli soldiers. I'll play my personal card. My father was killed in the Yom Kippur War. I cringe for every Israeli soldier who is now, and in the past 2 years, and in the past decades, is killed in those wars. Israel, in its current policy, cannot and does not keep Jews safe. And it's ever more clear today that it also does not keep Jews safe in the United States. It actually puts Jews in risk due to the warmongering policies that it supports. And it is even more dangerous now that the Trump administration, in fact, weaponizes anti-Semitism in order to crush liberal elites and universities. And we need to say that to the administration and to our fellow Jewish organizations. Weaponizing anti-Semitism creates anger towards Jews and puts Jews at risk. And we need to work for that for the sake of Palestinians, for the sake of Israelis, and for the sake of Jews worldwide. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that excellent foundation for the rest of this discussion. Assaf, I'm going to go back to you and begin my line of questioning with a question about the writing process for this report. So we know that you consulted with numerous scholars within both the Jewish and Arab communities of Israel. If you could tell us more about the input you received from Arab Israeli academics in particular.
Yeah, so I'll start with the writing team, which was consisted of mostly Jewish scholars and partially Israeli Palestinian scholars. All of the scholars and researchers that were part of the team are Israeli, i.e., have Israeli citizenship, either Jewish or Arab Palestinians. And I think that what we were trying to do is gear the report towards the mainstream of Israeli Jewish Israeli society. So we didn't usually use sensitive or words and expressions that might be seen too critical for Jewish Israelis, like apartheid, like genocide, like settler colonialism, which is a jargon that Jewish Israeli audience might not understand, or it seems like a curse word to them, and so on and so forth. We try to stay very, very close to the facts. So for Palestinians to be part of the writing team was in and of itself a question. I mean, should we be part of a report that approaches the Israeli Jewish mainstream? And we're very glad that at least two of them were part of the process, because they had a lot of input and a lot of very useful remarks to the framing of the report and to the discussion of facts and analysis and so on. Now, about the reception of the report, that was, I mean, I saw a question in the chat about the reception within the center left. Maybe talk about it later. I'll just talk about the endorsement process, in which we turn to scholars, both Israeli Jews and Palestinian Israelis, for endorsement. And by the way, some also Israeli American scholars that teach in in American universities. We try to avoid them mostly because we really wanted to focus on the fact that we're in Israel. We're talking to the Israeli public. We have responsibility for what we write, and the repercussions of what we recommend will be felt mainly by the Israeli community. So we want to keep it very Israeli. Now, for Israeli Palestinians, some of them were very grateful that we approached them and were gladly signed and endorsed the report. Others said very interesting things, like they didn't endorse it at the end, but mentioned that it's a very extensive and very positive report, but they don't feel that they should be part of the endorsement because of the fact that this report approaches the Israeli Jewish mainstream. They think that it's doing a hugely effective and needed work within this Israeli Jewish mainstream, but they don't feel that their name is of any value to this report. So let's keep it with the Israeli Jewish mainstream, which we obviously respected. And I even told them that I think that they're right. Since we had the our decision was to talk to the Israeli Jewish mainstream, that if they feel that they're not really part of this mainstream, or not even part of the Israeli community or Israeli nationality, as it were, that they respect the report and they watch it from afar. and that was completely understood.
Fascinating. Smadar, I'm gonna move on to you and get at certain of the lines of argumentation in the report, beginning with the concept of the day after. The title of the report, of course, is Present Day. In the executive summary, you write that the day after is today. What makes that the case?
What makes this the case is that the day after assumes an ultimate victory, an ultimate defeat of Hamas, after which Israel could undertake the de-radicalization kind of campaign. This was suggested. We took that notion from various policy documents that were published in Israel by other Israeli academics that created an analogy between this current conflict and, no less, the Second World War, saying that just like after the Allies' victory in the Second World War, the Allies were able to de-radicalize or form the new constitutions and political orders of Germany and Japan, so would Israel be able, after it defeats Hamas, to establish a new regional order based on its supremacy and on the complete defeat of Hamas. And we're here to say this day will not come. This day will not come. Hamas will not be defeated. And in fact, the time to make crucial decisions is not someday after that victory would be achieved. It is now, and in fact, it has in many ways been in the past. We are at a point of decision right now, and we need to take this moment seriously and do everything we can today without waiting for something to happen to enable the transition that we seek.
Definitely. Assaf, back to you, as moving to the questions of conflict management and sidelining the Palestinians. I know Smadar touched on this some. You argue in your report that both October 7th and the Gaza war that's followed mark a, quote, new history and a new era in the history of the Middle East, in which no longer can Palestinians be ignored. So why is the Abraham Accords approach of sidelining the Palestinians so unsustainable, especially after October 7th?
I think that, 5 years ago with the break of the Abraham Accords, which was at the same year of the deal of the century of the first Trump administration, and there were tightly connected. The idea of the deal of the century and the Abraham Accord were basically overlooking the occupation. And we at the Forum for Regional Thinking for 5 years have been telling nonstop that the fact that the Abraham Accords sidelined the Palestinians, and the fact that the Abraham Accords are not a normalization with Israel, but a normalization process with the occupation. And the fact that what Smadar mentioned before, the Arab Peace Initiative, has been abandoned basically because of the Abraham Accords. Because there's no roadmap to a Palestinian state. That was the only card that Arabs had, in fact, to push Israel to move forward with the Palestinians and not continue and prolong and deepen the occupation, which what Israel has been doing for years now, and especially under the right-wing and governments and the Netanyahu regime in recent years. And we've been saying it, I mean, it's not a peace. You should not look at it as a peace. It's not a peace. It's a normalization with the idea of occupation. It's a normalization with the idea of occupation is basically endless, and that Israel is not being demanded to end the occupation, not being demanded to even, stop the colonization, stop the expansion of settlements, and this notion of economic peace or whatever. That means that Israel wants the Palestinians to forget about their national aspirations and accept what Israel is being is willing to give them, which is food, welfare, to some extent, not freedom of movement, no security, and so on and so forth. And they will be treated as residents of this land and not as equal citizens, whether in a Palestinian state or a confederation or whatever. But with an end of occupation, um, and I remember that even within the center left political wing in Israel back then, people used to say, "What do you mean? We now have peace with the Gulf countries. They will push. They will push the Palestinians to concede, and they will push Israel, and so on and so forth. And we will, give boost to peace efforts." Nonsense. That was really nonsense. That just gave push and boost to the right wing to continue and deepen the expansion of settlements. Governments in Israel officially abandoned the two states solution, both the Bennett government and then the Netanyahu regime. It's no longer on the table officially. So what else the Palestinians had to do? And even the fact that we had the Palestinian Authority and we had the Hamas, West Bank versus Gaza, and the official policy of Israel, consecutive Israeli right-wing governments, was to treat Hamas as an asset and treat the Palestinian Authority as a liability. That was the official position and policy of consecutive Israeli governments. So that's, at the end, that took the Palestinian Authority to zero effect, zero popularity in the Palestinian population of the West Bank and Gaza, and bolstered Hamas. And at the end, the Netanyahu government had to use Qatar and actually beg Qatar. It was, the head of Mossad testified that he was sent, or his consecutive, or the predecessor, was sent to Qatar to beg the Qataris to finance Hamas at the order of Benjamin Netanyahu. So this is crazy. This was crazy. It was crazy. We said it from the very beginning. It's a dead end, and we saw the results, the outcomes of this dead end on October 7th.
Yep. So to pick up on that, Smadar, we've got the conflict management approach. We're sidelining the Palestinians. We're dividing and ruling, right, West Bank and Gaza Strip. All of this causes perpetual conflict. As you write in the report, militant Palestinian organizations and anti-Israel rejectionists alike are emboldened by the status quo. You write, quote, "Their popular legitimacy and power, in fact, rest on the occupation." Can you tell us more about how current Israeli policy feeds into Palestinian rejectionism?
Well, like I said very briefly in the beginning, the Oslo Accords kind of signaled a potential for a new era for Palestinians and for Israelis. What followed suit is that the lives of Palestinians in the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip, in fact, became worse rather than better under the Oslo Accords. The West Bank was divided into different areas, checkpoints, limitations on movement, on entry into Israel. The Palestinians did not see any benefit to them, to their daily lives from the Oslo Accords, and the Palestinian Authority began security coordinations with Israel that gave it the image in the Palestinian public of a collaborator with their occupier. So it lost trust within the Palestinian public. Further, after the disengagement, the support or understated support of Israel, of Hamas by Israel, further strengthened that. So the Israeli right was able to see from the early 2000s until 2023 and not only the Israeli right, also the Israeli mainstream, the Israeli high-tech sector, the Israeli security sector, all of these, that Israelis could live with the occupation and feel that they live without it, that they can rip all the benefits of Israel's status in the world, of Israel's economic development, without paying any price for the occupation. And they were led to think that this could last forever. That is the consequence in the Israeli public of the conflict management approach. What happened later, and I do think that the roots of our current situation, and that's kind of analysis that is beyond our paper, but is very relevant today, that the first Trump presidency really bolstered the Israeli far right. With the Abraham Accords, just like Assaf explained right now, that were actually, so the deal of the century meant that the US administration would support annexing the West Bank, that Israel would annex the West Bank. That was their position. And then they said, well, instead of annexing, we will have these peace agreements and we will not push for annexation. But the idea that the annexation of the West Bank is plausible in the international community and that the US would support it and that it would support this bypass route of normalization with the Arab world without the Palestinians really bolstered the Israeli right and made them believe that they could do it. They could actually annex the West Bank. They could discard the Gaza Strip and create a reality of de facto apartheid that will be supported by the United States and accepted by the world community. This is what conflict management is, in fact. It's about creating an apartheid system.
Assaf, back to you. I want to widen the discussion to the regional conflict more broadly, especially vis-a-vis Iran. You argue in the report that the alarmist discourse about the existential threat posed by Iran is woefully misguided, and that it's become intertwined with Israel's strategy of managing the conflict with the Palestinians. Can you explain that for us further?
So this is probably the most controversial argument in the report, which will be hard to swallow for center-left Zionist discourse in Israel. But we did feel that we have to push on this argument and put it in the regional context. We're not saying that Iran used to be or is a positive or constructive player or actor in Middle East politics. We're not saying that Iran is not a rival or even an enemy of Israel. We do acknowledge the fact that Iran financed and supported proxies like Hezbollah and Hamas, which caused Israel a lot of trouble in recent years, and obviously reaching the October 7th. But what we do see is that there were better strategies to deal with the Iranian threat. And first and foremost, what the former head of the Mossad, Meir Dagan, said just a year before he passed away. He said, basically, we did something that we shouldn't have done. We should have let the US and Western powers to lead the rivalry or fight against Iran and against nuclear aspirations of Iran, because no superpower or no regional power in the Middle East and beyond wants Iran to have nuclear capabilities. That's a fact. Now, the fact that because of political considerations of Benjamin Netanyahu as prime minister and Ehud Barak as defense minister back then, again, Meir Dagan's testimony, because of these political considerations, Israel made Iran the most formidable, the most existential threat to its to Israel existence. And then what happened basically is the Iranians got scared and started to finance and promote even more aggressive military operations and militant strategy of both Hezbollah and Hamas. And we shouldn't have done that. Now, about the fact that what do they mean when they say that they want to annihilate Israel? We don't know. I mean, we can guess or we can assume, but at least I think there's a good deal, a good argument on the fact that Iran doesn't want to exterminate Israel with a nuclear bomb, but basically wants Zionism to be wiped out of the map, and obviously, whatever that Israel-Palestine becomes one state equal for all its citizens. Now, we do say that even if you take Iran out of the equation, both Hezbollah and Hamas could be dealt with differently. And the fact that Hamas, and that's probably even a beginning of an answer to the question in the Q&A, the fact that Hamas got more militarized, got more extreme, and on October 7th, did, as I said, horrible things that none of us and probably none of the Palestinians thought that they were capable of doing or, had the stomach to do, is at least partly or mainly because of what Israel pushed the Palestinians to do in terms of using violent strategies and left no other choice for diplomatic or political negotiations with Israel. Now, you can also look at it as Hamas is being Hamas, Hezbollah is being Hezbollah, Iran is being Iran. They are still rational players. They're rational players. They're not ISIS. They're not Salafiyya Jihadiyya. They could be dealt with. They used to be dealt with. I mean, Israel used Qatar to push Hamas to do 1, 2, 3. Israel used Egypt to do that. Israel basically was in negotiations with Hamas, and Hamas, at least in some points in its history, in recent history with Israel, offered a truce, hudna, with Israel. Now, when you look at, and I finish with that, when you look at regional context, Israel had many powerful, wealthy actors in Middle Eastern politics, including all of the Arab Gulf states that also see Iran as a rival. We could use it. We could use their power to curb the Iranian influence by giving the Palestinians their rights. And if we did that, we were in an utterly different position in which we're now.
Certainly. Smadar, returning to the Gaza war and its implications for the kind of Israeli policy that you're envisioning, a two-pronged question here. What does the destruction of Gaza mean for the pursuit of a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace? And your report uses language such as ethnic cleansing of Palestinians in Gaza, indiscriminate killing of civilians there to describe the destruction. How do you arrive at those conclusions?
Well, it is not hard to arrive at these conclusions. I'm sorry to say, it's not complicated. It really is not complicated. When you see a policy or a military strategy that allows for the killing of so many civilians, women and children, that attacks civilian infrastructure, civilian neighborhoods, refugee camps, and decimates them. I'm sorry to say, as an expert on international law and the international law of armed conflict, this is disproportionate. These are not legitimate military targets. The fact that we count women and children as in such huge proportions, like 2/3 of the victims, it's not only because we are merciful or emotional
Mhm.
about women and children. It means that these people were not military legitimate targets. They were not combatants. This is the crucial distinction in the international law of armed conflict between legitimate military targets and illegitimate military targets. Women and children are typically, they could be, but typically they are not the Hamas fighters. And when the proportions are so high, when aid workers and defense workers are being killed in such proportions, and we only heard in the news yesterday of a mass grave of aid workers that were discovered with hands tied and shot in the head. And when we see the joyful posts on social media of Israeli soldiers really rejoicing over, it's hard for me to say. I
Yep.
really don't
Yep.
take it lightly. I don't. But you cannot unsee what we have seen in Gaza, both in terms of how incited and motivated are Israeli soldiers and Israeli officers and Israeli commanders to just cause the most severe destruction that they can. And with the Israeli policies of, leave aside proportionality that I've been talking about and military targets that I've been talking about. Blocking aid, water, electricity, food, all the bakeries in Gaza are now closed. This is not a targeted, smart war. This is causing shock and awe and destroying a community. Now, I have many Palestinian friends, colleagues, former clients in the Gaza Strip and elsewhere. The pain is unimaginable. And we can't psychologically, it's hard for us to step into their shoes and sense what they are feeling when all of these deaths are happening in front of our eyes. But beyond that, this destruction could be the destruction of our future, the destruction of our shared future. How could we imagine? We could, but it's going to be so hard, and every day makes it harder. The possibility of reconciliation after such destruction.
Right.
Now,
Right.
I don't mean to say that it's impossible. Atrocities have happened before. And we know that very well. We know that very well. We Israelis and Jews and Holocaust survivors have relations with Germany. We understand that society is complex and it's evolving, and that change for the better can happen. Apartheid in South Africa was very cruel, very cruel. People were killed and were driven out of their lands, and their lands were burnt, and there were so many atrocities, and yet they have reached a point of truth and reconciliation, and knowing that they need to move beyond that, because we can't stay stuck in this zero-sum game of constantly killing each other.
Yep.
So on the one hand, we need to acknowledge the destruction. I stand on the shoulders of greater people than I am. The International Court of Justice found that it was plausible that Israel may be committing genocide. It's not final yet, but there was enough evidence for that. Is that the place we want to be in? It makes Israel a tragedy for the Jewish people. So on the one hand, we must acknowledge the destruction and the atrocity. And on the other hand, we must acknowledge that there is a way forward after destruction, that many times the crisis, right, is the point from which a new beginning is possible, but it must be based on an acknowledgement of the atrocities of the past.
Avraham, can I add something, please?
You absolutely can. Can I also insert, because we've got 15 minutes remaining, I want to incorporate audience Q&A, but I want to pose this last question to you, and Assaf, if you can incorporate it into your response
Okay.
here. You talk in the report about the costs for Israel politically, economically, socially, and morally. I want to focus in on the last two. In what way is Israeli society paying the cost socially and morally?
Well, it's really connected to what I wanted to add to Smadar's extremely important words. As I said, I believe that Israel is currently, at least for the past 2 years, is under an authoritarian regime, which is growing more violent towards, obviously towards Palestinians, but also towards dissidents. And there are many dissidents in Israel, Jewish Israeli dissidents that are not part of radical left in any way, that are from center and left wing. Many of them were former ex-military and security generals. It's very important to stress this fact, because they give some sort of validation or security validation to the protest against the government. And what we are seeing, as I said, at least for the past 2 years, but especially after the beginning of the war, is the total breakout of any moral restrictions and social restrictions that the Israeli government used to accept on themselves. And I think that abandoning the hostages and leaving them to die and be tortured endlessly in Hamas tunnels in Gaza is tearing the Israeli society apart, and it will not be easily, if any, reconnected again if it happens. So that's one thing. And second, morally, going back to what Smadar said, and what I want to add, I remember during the first year of this horrible Netanyahu regime, before the break of the war, that many of us felt that we're like Jews in Germany in the 30s, seeing this ominous trends of fascism in our country, and asking ourselves, when is the time to leave? Because we know that we're going to see a catastrophe. Everybody knew that we are going to meet a catastrophe at the end, either economic or military or something. And I think what we've been feeling for the past year, as this war continued and continued endlessly, as that we're not Jews in Germany in the 30s, we're Germans in Germany in the 40s, having to deal with what we are doing in our bare hands to the Palestinians. I mean, how do we recover as Jews in Israel from what our own people are doing to the Palestinians? I mean, we didn't use the word genocide in the report, as I said, and I explained why, but we do know that most of the genocide analytical and research community and the world believe that what is going on in Gaza is a genocide. And if not, that will be the case study in years to come with the genocide community, whether what was in Gaza was a genocide or just simply war crimes, or, horrible war crimes. So I really don't know how we can recover from this. I do know that we offered at least some sort of a way forward, which is to take responsibility for what we've done, take responsibility for Palestinian well-being, both in Gaza and in the West Bank, we should stand in solidarity with the Palestinians, because right now, most of the Jewish, and I urge you to know this fact because it is a fact and it's backed by hard data. Most of the Israeli Jewish community in Israel now support, this way or another, ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, especially from Gaza, but also from the West Bank. And this is what we can do to save some of our humanity, both Jewish humanity and humanity towards the Palestinians.
Critically important hard truths that we're going to have to grapple with and make amends for. So with our final 9-10 minutes or so remaining, I'd like to pose a few questions from the audience to you both, beginning with Smadar. Correct me if I'm wrong, I don't believe that you get at the question of Israeli educational curricula in Israeli schools. But one audience question is, how does the curriculum in Israeli schools, Jewish and Palestinian, affect public perception of the conflict and this alternative path to peace?
Well, it's been a while since I've been to Israeli schools, and actually even since my children have. And we did, I think, send them to a better school than between the ones that were available to us. But I can say a few things. There is a battle going on over the curriculum, over the textbooks that students in Israel have been studying. The textbooks that have been pushed to the education system over the last 8 years, I think, are written from a viewpoint of Jewish supremacy. Loud and clear. They erase the green line, the entire state, the entire territory of Israel-Palestine is presented as the territory of Israel. The occupation does not exist there in all of these curriculum. What does exist is biblical stories about our right on the land that is taught. My kids and other kids learn the Bible every year in school, every year. It's mandatory. And it is used to establish the national narrative that this land is ours and we are returning. And no others are present there. When I was in high school, I was taught that the Palestinian refugee problem was created by the Palestinians and the Arab states, that Palestinians fled during the 1948 war, and that Arab countries have deliberately sustained the Palestinian refugee problem in order to slam Israel, right? This was what I learned in high school. And in fact, my political transition, really, my political transition was when I started reading the new history, when I read Benny Morris about 1948 and the creation of the Palestinian refugee problem. That was my political transition. This is what you don't learn in schools. And your political transition happens not only because you learn new knowledge, but you learn that you've been lied to, that you've been told untrue stories. So you start asking yourself, okay, why was I led to believe things that are not true? What is the narrative that is pushed here, that I'm pushed into, to see myself as part of that narrative? And you start to understand and to construct an alternative narrative that actually fits the history and sociology of what has happened in Israel over the years.
Assaf, if I can ask you, with our 5 minutes remaining here, we didn't get a chance to talk about the contours of a Palestinian state. We know that your report stopped short of formally endorsing 2 states, 1 state, confederation, etc. One of the audience questions is, how can Israelis be convinced that an eventual Palestinian state won't pose a threat to them?
Well, it's a very good question. It's probably the $1 million questions for
Indeed.
Israeli Jews.
Right.
How can we guarantee our security in the post Gaza war or even before? Um, Obviously, no one in the world and in ethnically divided societies and war-torn countries like ourselves can guarantee 100% security. We acknowledge and recognize the obvious fact that Israel will always have to have a strong army, strong intelligence, and so on and so forth. But the fact is that the only thing that Israel has today is a strong army and a strong intelligence, pick or take a day, which is obviously October 7th, in which we didn't have nothing basically. Um, but we have only this. We have got to have also a political diplomatic skills and thinking and strategy that will allow us to offer the Palestinians and the Israelis a way out of violence. And the way out of violence is the best guarantee of security. Now, about the contours of a Palestinian state, we really didn't delve too much into it because we didn't want to, decide whether we promote two-state solution, confederation, one state, whatever. We offered principles. If you ask me personally, what I think is feasible for the next, at least for the foreseeable future in Israel-Palestine, we're not talking very regretfully about a Palestinian state as a state. We're talking about self-rule of some kind of autonomy. We think it will be a wrong path. It won't offer Palestinians sovereignty. It won't offer them independence. I don't see any government in Israel. I don't see any government in the U.S. Being able to push for a formal, a Palestinian state. So I think what we have to prepare for in Israel, especially Israeli Jewish left community, is how do we protect Palestinian lives and Palestinian rights in the context of self-rule or autonomy. That's my take.
Thank you for that, Smadar. I'm going to try to squeeze in one more question here before we have to go, and you'll close us out. So one of our questioners writes that they're sympathetic with the prescriptions in the report, but worry about turning off certain audiences, the diaspora Jewish community, especially in the United States. You're uniquely positioned to answer what the role of diaspora Jewry is in all this, the international community more broadly. Give us a few final words on that.
I think both the international community and the Jewish American public have an extremely important role to play. None of these tragedies of October 7th and the ensuing war would have happened without the support of the United States and without the role that the United States had played in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And the position among the Israeli Jewish community of we support Israel no matter what, because Israel represents us and it keeps Jews safe, is no longer tenable. When Israel is so divided, just like Assaf said, where people are protesting in the streets, where people are feeling, and rightly so, that they're under a fascist government, when you support Israel, who do you support? Do you support the Israeli government, or you support large parts of the Israeli public? The question is, do we support a system of values and a system of government that would make Israel sustainable, durable, and prosperous? And all of these values and policy prescriptions are now under a severe attack, the most severe in our recent history by the Trump government and by the Israeli government and other similar allies in the world. We're at a crucial moment for the world order after World War II. And we need to fight back.
Yep.
We need to fight back.
Yep.
It's what's been happening with the Trump administration is very disorienting. We are at shock. It is very disorienting. It's very quick. It's out of any playbook that we've known. And we are in a state of shock, but we are beginning to organize. And it is a crucial moment to each and every one of us to stand for in every capacity that we have in society and in government in order to foment the values of democracy, human rights in the world that we live in, because it's gonna boomerang back at us so fast before we know it. So we are in shock, and rightly so. We need to regroup and organize and know that we're in the struggle for our lives and struggle for what we believe in.
So we'll end with that very important call to action. Thank you both for being here, and thank you to the audience. That's the end of our discussion today. Take care, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.